Hi, I'm Dr. Hart. I'm going to talk to you about trauma, what it is, how to recognize it, how to respond to it, and how to take care of yourself while you're working in it. According to SAMHSA, individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functional and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Let's take a closer look at some of those terms, and we'll start with event. A physically harmful traumatic event can include natural disasters, interpersonal violence, involvement in a serious accident, or acts of violence. But some commonly overlooked emotionally and psychologically harmful traumatic events can include breakups, divorce, humiliating experiences, surgeries, falls, sudden deaths of a loved one, or the diagnosis of a disability. And experience means physically experienced, like someone who was on the scene at the time of an event of violence or natural disaster, witnessed an experience, which is seeing the event and affected by it, was either supposed to be there, like calling out sick the day of an office shooting, or has a close relationship with somebody who has experienced trauma, like someone who was raised by an alcoholic. Let's review. In the following scenarios, I want you to identify which experience would qualify someone to be a trauma survivor. We'll do the first one together. Did a person who witnessed a hurricane experience trauma? You would answer yes, because witnessing a natural disaster means it's a traumatic experience. Let's review those. A through H are traumatic experiences. Notice in B, the person who caused the accident is also a person who just experienced a car crash. Both the drunk driver and the person they hit are people who have experienced trauma. Actually, even the last one, I, someone who physically abused their spouse, is a person who has experienced trauma. But let's talk about why. Hurt people hurt people. By completing these trainings, you'll begin to see people in a light. The person who commits the crime is a person with their own history, and so is the person who gets hurt by them. Violence is rarely born out of accident or boredom. Looking at everyone around you with a renewed sense of humanity or seeing interconnectedness between unlikely people can be tough, which brings us to our first definition of what practicing trauma-informed care is. Trauma-informed care means developing compassion for the experiences a person has been through. It's a recognition that each person you meet has a story, and though we may not know it, we accept that that story is affecting the person's behavior, decisions, relationships, and actions. Remember, the compassion you develop for the people who you work with will never, ever be wasted. There's no official list that qualifies certain events as traumatic and others as not. Often it's how a person experiences the event that makes something traumatic or not. There's no official tests. The greatest tool you have is to believe someone at their story. If someone tells you that they identify as a trauma survivor, even if you have doubt, chances are that it's what's been left unsaid that makes that person qualify. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. If someone says they need help, they need help. You might be looking at that list of events and experiences and thinking, so wait, has everyone experienced trauma? You'd be right in thinking that. There aren't many people who have not experienced trauma in one way or another. Let's take a look at some of the facts about how common traumatic experience is today. According to SAMHSA, in the United States, 61% of men and 51% of women report exposure to at least one lifetime traumatic event. 70% of adults in the US have experienced some type of traumatic event at least one time in their lives. That's 223.4 million people. And in public behavioral health settings, over 90% of clients have experienced trauma. In the United States, a woman is beaten every 15 seconds. And a forcible rape happens every 6 minutes. That means that by the end of this video, at least 2 women have experienced assault in the United States. Nearly all children who witness a parental homicide or sexual assault will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Similarly, 90% of sexually abused children, 77% of children exposed to school shooting, and 35% of urban youth exposed to community violence develop PTSD. If you're not sure what PTSD is now, don't worry, we'll cover it in a later video. So with all of this information, I want you to do some writing. Go grab your notebook or your phone and a pen and write down the first things that come to mind for this question. What is your own definition of what trauma is? You can draw from personal experiences, definitions you've read, trainings you've been to, or anything that inspired you in this training now. Because this word encompasses so many different events, experiences, memories, and people, it's important for you to have your own personal grasp of what that word means when you use it. For me, today, trauma means the need to rebuild your world and how it works after extreme experiences. Hang on to your definitions. You'll use them in your first group discussion with your residential coordinator. Now that we have an understanding about what trauma is, let's look at the emotional and physical effects of it on people. 3 things to note. There's no timeline for when symptoms present. It can happen right after a traumatic event, or it can happen years later. Different people have different responses. These responses will look and sound different in different people, but you'll begin to see the patterns. And lastly, responses change. One response might go away and another one takes its place. This generally happens until a person. People can have emotional and physical effects after traumatic experience. Emotional effects can include flashbacks, difficulty trusting people, denial about the experience, anger, sadness, outbursts, and unexplainable irritation, especially at small things. And the physical effects can include muscle tension, fatigue, poor concentration, racing heartbeat, panic attacks, and sleep disturbances. If this feels like a long list, don't worry. In the next video in this series, we'll go over these traumatic responses in more detail, including how to recognize them and how to respond to them. Because residents of the Nest identify as LGBTQ+, are living with HIV and AIDS, and often their race, the Nest residents are at greater risk for trauma, including homelessness, stigma, mental health disorders, PTSD. Currently in the United States, the number 1 transmission mode of HIV and AIDS is through sex between men, and the men who are being most impacted are African American young men. Stigma against people living with HIV is not only still prevalent, it's dangerous. According to the Gay and Lesbian Task Force, deception is considered one of the safest methods of coming out. According to one study, 50% of gay males experienced a negative parental reaction when they came out, and 26% of those disclosures were met with a demand that the youth leave the home immediately. Without the Nest, there's a great chance that the residents here would experience homelessness. According to the Gay and Lesbian Task Force, 5% of youth, or approximately 1 million, experience homelessness in any given year, and LGBTQ+ youth are 125% more times likely to experience homelessness than their heterosexual peers. You must be wondering, what can you do? It's my belief that trauma is a pattern. It often happens repetitively and in cycles, like addictions and bad relationships and family intergenerational abuse. But if trauma is a pattern, so is healing. It's really tiny gestures of trust accumulated over time that will help connect a person to a life of recovery that they can trust and sustain for themselves. But getting there is not an easy or a short path. Here are some things that you can do to hold the door open for someone. You can be their mirror. See everyone in front of you as capable of fulfilling their wildest dreams, because you are their connection to a present day that hasn't been fractured. You hold up the best version of themselves. Try your best to normalize rejection, anger, and sadness, even if it's just letting someone sit down by you after they blew off some steam. Believe in the power of recovery, and that by using the tools of the program of the house, you can help bridge survivors to gainful, purpose-driven, beautiful lives. Lastly, if you found identification in this video today, remember that you didn't get here by accident. No one who comes to this work does. You're using your experience to make a difference in the life of another person. So as you move through these trainings, remember that the tools that are shared are easier to give to your resident if you're practicing them for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me for this first video in our series, and don't miss the attached worksheet where you'll get some guided questions for reflection that you'll discuss with your residential coordinator and your peers. See you next time.